In one of humanity's oldest stories, a serpent steals the secret to eternal life. In another ancient story, one you probably know better, a serpent also appears at the pivotal moment about life and death. But here's what's strange. The Bible seems almost uninterested in the quest for immortality that obsessed the ancient world. The answer reveals something surprising about how we've been reading Genesis all wrong. To understand what Genesis is doing, we first need to know what it's not doing, and that means looking at Gilgamesh. This is the original hero's journey. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, starts as a tyrant. Then he meets Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods. They become inseparable friends. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh faces mortality for the first time. He cannot accept it, so he embarks on an impossible quest, crossing primeval seas to find Utnapishtim, the only human ever granted immortality. Gilgamesh wants to know the secret. He wants to live forever. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh about the plan at the bottom of the sea, the plan of eternal youth. Gilgamesh retrieves it, victory, but on his journey home, he stops to bathe in a pool. A serpent smells the plant, slithers up, and steals it. The serpent sheds its skin and slips away, forever young. Gilgamesh weeps. He returns to Uruk empty-handed, finally accepting that human accomplishments are our only lasting legacy. The city walls he built will outlive him. That's enough. So, if immortality was the ancient world's obsession, how does Genesis handle it? The answer is it barely does. Right? Notice something curious about the tree of life in Genesis. It appears with a definite article, the tree of life, as if audiences already knew what it was. They did, and this was a familiar ancient Near Eastern motif, but Genesis barely mentions it. The tree gets introduced, then ignored until the very end when God bars access to it permanently. The quest for immortality, the central drama of Gilgamesh, gets shut down before it begins. Here's the clever move. The serpent, linked to immortality in Gilgamesh, gets reassigned. In Genesis, the serpent has nothing to do with the tree of life. Instead, it tempts humans toward the tree of knowledge. Genesis takes the immortality symbol and redirects it entirely. The serpent still appears at the pivotal moment, but the stakes have changed. Genesis isn't interested in whether humans can achieve immortality. It assumes they can't and moves on. This deliberate deflection tells us something crucial about how to read these chapters. And these stories are etiological. They explain why things are the way they are. Etiological means explaining origins or causes. Gilgamesh explains why snakes shed their skin. They got the immortality plant. Genesis explains other puzzling features of human existence. Why is childbirth painful? Why is survival difficult? Why do humans feel shame about nakedness? Why do women often bond emotionally to those who subordinate them? These are ancient explanatory fables, not necessarily prescriptions for how things should be. The text describes the world ancient people observed and offers a story about how it got that way. Reading Genesis as God's ideal blueprint misses what the text is actually doing. This challenges the original sin reading. Later interpreters, Augustine most famously, read Genesis as describing inherited sinfulness passed through generations. But ancient Jewish interpreters noted something different. The text says Adam and Eve's actions brought death, not a state of moral corruption. Genesis emphasizes mortality, not sinfulness. The punishment is clear. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. The story explains why humans die. It doesn't describe a spiritual disease transmitted to all descendants. The interpretation came centuries later. But the etiological reading raises another question. What kind of God is this story describing? A surprisingly adaptive one. The tree of life wasn't originally guarded. Access was barred in response to disobedience, not as part of an original design. God's reasoning, as the text presents it, humans with moral freedom plus immortality equals immortal enemies. and the text explicitly shows God modifying plans. This portrays a dynamic relationship between creator and created. Humans emerge as genuinely unpredictable, even to their creator. The story depicts a God who responds and adjusts, not one executing a predetermined script. And then there's the puzzling plural, Genesis 3:22. The man has become like one of us. Who is God talking to? The cherubim who guard the tree of life. What are these divine beings doing in a monotheistic text? Earlier in Genesis, let us make humans in our image. These plurals suggest a divine council, other heavenly beings surrounding God. Ancient readers wouldn't have found this strange. Strict monotheism developed later. The text preserves older traditions where God operates among other divine figures. So what do we do with all this? When reading ancient texts, ask, what is this explaining, before asking, what is this prescribing? Comparative reading, Genesis alongside Gilgamesh, reveals what biblical authors emphasized and what they deliberately avoided. The immortality quest that dominates Gilgamesh gets compressed to almost nothing in Genesis. That's not an accident. The original sin doctrine came from later interpreters. The text itself is more interested in explaining human mortality than human sinfulness. These distinctions matter for how we understand what Genesis is actually claiming. The Bible's silence on the immortality quest isn't an oversight, it's a deliberate theological choice. By making immortality permanently inaccessible, Genesis redirects our attention from living forever to how we live now. Gilgamesh ends with acceptance, build your city walls, do your work, leave something behind. Genesis ends with expulsion, but also with continuation. Humans go out into the world, have children, build civilizations. Both stories acknowledge mortality as the human condition, but Genesis refuses to make that the drama. And the quest is over before it starts. The cherubim stand guard. Move on. The question isn't whether you'll live forever. The question is what you'll do with the life you have. That's the theological pivot Genesis makes.